the gentrification that nobody is talking about in Venezuela. Today we discuss.
Welcome to Venezuela Insider, the only place in Venezuela for expats, digital nomads, entrepreneurs, investors, travelers, and related internationals. For more information, venezuelainsider.com.
One of the topics du jour in Latin America and actually in the US and Europe as well is gentrification. And what's happening right now, let's start with Latin America, is that since the Western nations, especially the United States, has gotten very expensive, US has always been expensive, but always with a good ROI, of course, depending on the location, Miami, New York, Texas, California, you name. Anyways, but since COVID and also all of the implementation of these particular policies like the CARES Act and overspending of public funds and taxes and also the money printing from the Federal Reserve, what we're seeing right now is inflation, very high inflation for US standards. So the living costs in the US and other major European economies has gotten very, very expensive and unbearable for most citizens over there and most citizens of those respective nations. So thanks to that Latin America has a cheaper cost of living, many hubs over there in Latin America, or many cities here on the continent, has gotten very attractive for Western internationals, like, of course, Mexico City, the Riviera Maya, another handful of places in Mexico, Panama City, if you want to throw that, Medellin, of course, Buenos Aires, and some Brazilian hubs, and so on and so on. Even Bolivia has some international expats living over there. And of course, this particular situation is creating gentrification in the most important hubs in Latin America, of course, like Mexico City and also Medellin. Prices have gotten more expensive for their regional standards, so the average population is suffering. Well, of course, it depends also the particular situation. If you are a savvy entrepreneur, you can make something out of it, and of course, some businesses are doing pretty much fine, even doing better with those particular incentives, but most people are actually suffering rising in cost of living over there. First, you have to add that these people earn in local currency, not in US dollars or euros or any other kind of hard currency. So prices, cost of living has gotten more expensive. If you are a renter on those particular hubs, also rents are going higher. In some cases, they are built on hard currency. And the sentiment overall is that you have to add some sentimental issues. Most people in Latin America actually get along pretty much fine with Western citizens, especially from the US, but there are a handful of people that have a negative sentiment towards the United States and Western Europe and that kind of places. Now, coming back to Venezuela, how does that fact affect the Venezuelan economy? We have gentrification in Venezuela? No and yes. And basically, there are two kinds, and this is what I'm going to explain today. First, the Venezuelan economy is already expensive for the average citizen here. And I explained this many times, the 80% GDP collapse, supply chains, mutations, and distortions that are fixed, but is right now an ongoing project for the Venezuelan economy. Very good. Now, the two kinds of gentrification that we have in Venezuela are first, let's discuss the right now the traditional, the du jour gentrification from the West. We have it not actually except on Margarita Island and Caracas, actually the east side of Caracas, and my hometown Lecheria, of course, and that's pretty much it. And of course, in order to offer services to Los Roques and Canaima, those are coveted services, touristic services for internationals and also for wealthy Venezuelans. But the issue is that basically those are remote locations, and pretty much no average Venezuelan lives on those particular touristic destinations unless they are touristic providers. Now, here's how the international gentrification works in Venezuela. We have the cohort of internationals that come to Venezuela are different from the ones that go to the rest of Latin America. First, we have a bunch of migration, well, it's called expats, from China, from Russia, from Iran, usually people that come from work for government institutions or multinational companies. And also you have to add the Western multinational companies like Chevron that work here, also the Spanish Repsol. They usually pay hefty salaries to their employees, well, the international employees. So let's put them right now on this, everyone on this particular cohort. They, of course, since Venezuela is a dangerous, quote-unquote, terrible place to live, they require high-end properties in order to, of course, rent and get shelter. Meanwhile, they do their particular diligence in Venezuela. So what happens is that these people, of course, they pay premium prices for top-quality properties. And the bottom line is that they reset the market for the local Venezuelan and even for the international that is not a wealthy international, or they are here in the country, let's say they are wealthy, but they are not doing it for business just because like to be in the country. So they create an artificial demand for the Venezuelan rental market. For instance, in my hometown Lecheria, what happens is that it's a small and probably the safest city in Venezuela. It's a beautiful city. I put a bunch of videos here on the channel. And what happened is it's a small city, it's a posh, luxurious, quote-unquote city for Venezuelan standards. And the real estate over there is more expensive compared to the rest of the country. Very good. But also you have a bunch of multinationals. Over there, of course, you have Western employees of this particular multinational, quote-unquote expats. Very good. So usually they don't like to do the due diligence on how much a property actually costs. They usually overpay for a rent in these particular high-end properties, mid-end properties, and what ends up happening is they get one of these properties and the rest of the market watches this particular transaction, this artificial transaction, and resets the market for the rest of the rental properties. Same thing in Caracas, and also on a lesser degree on Margarita Island, but in Margarita Island you have more supply. So the issue compared to the rest of Latin America, in Venezuela, we have way less internationals, but we have more wealthy internationals regarding that the average purchasing power of the average international here in the country is superior compared to the purchasing power of the average international in Mexico, Colombia, you name. Also, since Venezuela gets very expensive, Venezuela is very expensive for internationals. For Latin American standards, but still manageable. It's a funny thing how it works. I explained this a bunch of times. Venezuela, the prices in Venezuela discourage people, let's say, like backpackers, low-end, low-income internationals, low-income Europeans, low-income Americans, and also Americans have to go an extra hurdle because they need a visa in order to get to Venezuela. That's very difficult to get, actually. And my clients already know that. And the bottom line is that the massive gentrification that you see in other places in Latin America, like in Mexico and Colombia, is probably not going to happen in Venezuela because the prices are already high for the average Venezuelan. The low-end, low-income international is going to find Venezuela very, very expensive for their budget. Meanwhile, the mid-high end of international regarding financial income, they are going to find Venezuela actually very attractive because on that particular cohort is that Venezuela gives you the best ROI. But if you are cheap or stingy with your money, you are on a budget, and you want to stretch a very low budget, Venezuela is the worst place in Latin America in order to do so. And last thing that I'm going to add, but this place in the equation is, and yet again, I have to explain inequality. Venezuela is one of the most unequal nations in the world, the Gini coefficient. I'm going to put the Gini coefficient yet again. just the Lorenz curve and that kind of stuff. Okay, so basically, the bottom line is that the translation is Venezuela is very, very, very unequal. Most people are impoverished. Around 80% of Venezuelans are impoverished. Around 50% of Venezuelans are on extreme poverty for Venezuelan standards, not for, it's a tricky equation, but okay. So 80% of Venezuelans are poor. They are impoverished. It's not like the other 10% are wealthy, but the top 2% of Venezuelans are very, very, very rich. I'm talking very, very, very rich. And also, when compared to a rich person in a Western nation, the money when you are rich in Venezuela goes way far. So imagine having $1 million in Venezuela is like having $10 million in a city like Miami, something like that. Just to put an example. Very good. So combine this particular dichotomy, this particular equation of, let's say, less internationals for more wealthy ones compared to this a significant cohort of rich Venezuelans. 1%, I'm going to say 1% and that's it. 1%, you add that up, and the economic incentives for most companies and providers and that kind of stuff, the incentives are going to go cater towards them. And of course, compared to the purchasing power of the average Venezuelan, that creates a lot of quote-unquote difficulties in order to access to certain goods and services. So things like renting, hotels, accommodation, and also plane tickets, fancy dining, or touristic services are going to be more expensive, are going to be prohibitive expensive for most Venezuelans, manageable for financially stable people. I'm talking both from Venezuela and also from abroad. But Venezuela is a country that rejects, and it's one of the most difficult things about living in Venezuela, is that if you are not financially stable, quote unquote, of course, you can define this depending on a particular income and also on a particular situation, depending if you are either a Venezuelan or an international. So Venezuela discourages not being financially stable, and that creates a lot of distortions on the Venezuelan economy. And remember that any businessman, any entrepreneur is going to establish their businesses in order to cater to people with has purchasing power in order to serve that particular side of the market. Anyways, bottom line is rich people, both domestic rich people, domestic Venezuelans that are rich. Bottom line is that both the rich international, the expat, and that people on that particular cohort, combined with the quote-unquote rich Venezuelan, top 1-2% of Venezuelan, they are the ones that have more stable purchasing power in order to demand goods and services. And hence, you have these particular services, I'm talking luxury services, are more that actually give you good ROI in Venezuela, but they are only reserved for this particular cohort of rich Venezuelans and rich internationals, and they are very expensive and prohibitive expensive for the average Venezuelan. And right now, this is kind of the gentrification state of affairs in the country.
Thank you for watching Venezuela Insider. Please like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on social media. If you want to work with us, VenezuelaInsider.com. Thanks again, and have a nice day.